"I can't go," the women cried. What the Hell's Angel did next saved her life. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows of Maggie's bookstore cafe, casting warm shadows across the well-worn wooden floors. She sat at her usual spot behind the counter, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she sorted through a stack of invoices. The familiar scent of coffee and old books wrapped around her like a comfortable blanket. The quiet hum of the cafe was interrupted by the shrill ring of her phone. Maggie glanced at the screen, her heart skipping a beat when she saw Cleo's name. It had been months since they'd last spoken. "Hello?" Maggie answered, setting down her pen. "Little sister?" Cleo's voice burst through the speaker, full of its usual energy. "I've been thinking about you." Maggie couldn't help but smile. Despite their differences, her sister's voice always brought a sense of warmth. "It's good to hear from you, Cleo. How are you?" "Oh, you know me. Still kicking up dust wherever I go." Cleo chuckled, but there was something different in her tone, a slight edge that made Maggie sit up straighter. "Listen, Mags, I've got something important to talk to you about." Maggie's fingers absently traced the edge of her invoice pad. "What is it?" "I heard from Holly last week." Cleo paused, letting the name settle between them. "Holly?" Maggie's breath caught. Images of their college days flooded back. Late-night study sessions, shared dreams, and endless laughter. "I haven't heard that name in years." "She's sick, Maggie. Really sick." Cleo's voice softened. "The doctors, they don't think she has much time left." Maggie closed her eyes, her free hand gripping the edge of the counter. "Oh, no." "I want us to go see her," Cleo said, her words picking up speed. "She's in California now. We could drive out there together, just like we used to talk about doing after graduation. Remember those road trip plans we made?" "Cleo." Maggie's stomach tightened. The thought of leaving her bookstore, her routine, her safe little world, made her pulse quicken. I can't just leave everything." "Why not? You have Sarah who can watch the store. She's been working for you for what, 5 years now?" "That's not the point," Maggie protested, even as guilt crept into her chest. It's too much, too far, too sudden." "Life is sudden, Maggie." Cleo's frustration crackled through the phone. "Holly was our friend. She needs us now." Maggie looked around her store, at the carefully arranged shelves, the regular customers quietly browsing, the life she'd built within these 4 walls. "I'm sorry, Cleo. I just can't." "Can't? Or won't?" Cleo's words stung. "You can't keep hiding forever, Maggie." "I'm not hiding," Maggie whispered, but the words felt hollow. I can't go. I'm sorry." The silence that followed felt heavy with disappointment. Finally, Cleo sighed. "All right, Mags. I won't push. But think about it, please." After they said their goodbyes, Maggie sat in the growing darkness of her store. The familiar surroundings that usually brought her comfort now felt like witnesses to her cowardice. Holly's face danced in her memory, young, vibrant, full of dreams. She thought about all the letters they'd meant to write, all the visits they'd planned but never made. The steady tick of the wall clock echoed through the empty store. Each second seemed to whisper of opportunities missed, of life passing by while she stood still. Maggie sat there, surrounded by thousands of stories on her shelves, while her own remained safely unopened. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. Maggie stood by the bookstore window, absently dusting the same spot on the wooden display shelf for the 3rd time. Outside, Mrs. Peterson walked past with her grandchildren, their faces lit up as they licked ice cream cones from the parlor down the street. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the window, making the dust particles dance in the golden light. Her conversation with Cleo from yesterday still echoed in her mind. "I can't just leave," she whispered to herself, though the empty store offered no reply. The thought of traveling across the country made her stomach twist into knots. Behind her, the shelves of carefully arranged books stood as silent witnesses to her internal struggle. How many years had she spent here, safely tucked away between these walls? The familiar scent of coffee and old pages usually brought her comfort, but today it felt somehow suffocating. Mr. Jenkins, the retired postman, waved as he passed by. Maggie managed a weak smile and a small wave in return. She watched him shuffle down the sidewalk, his daily routine as predictable as her own. Was this all there was? The same faces, the same streets, the same careful distance she kept from everything and everyone? The bell above the door chimed, pulling her from her thoughts. Cleo burst in, her silver hair slightly wind-blown, her cheeks flushed with determination. "I'm not taking no for an answer, Maggie," Cleo announced, marching straight to the counter. "Holly needs us. You need this." Maggie sighed, setting down her dusting cloth. "Cleo, please. We've been through this. I have the store to think about." "The store will still be here when you get back," Cleo interrupted, her voice rising with frustration. She gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles turning white. "You can't keep hiding in here forever, pretending the world doesn't exist outside these four walls." "I'm not hiding," Maggie protested weakly, but the words felt hollow even to her own ears. Suddenly, Cleo's face contorted. Her hand flew to her chest, and she stumbled backward. "Maggie!" she gasped, her voice barely a whisper. Maggie froze for a split second, watching in horror as her sister's face drained of color. "Cleo?" Her voice cracked with fear. Cleo's knees buckled, and she started to collapse. Maggie rushed around the counter, barely managing to catch her sister before she hit the floor. "Help!" she screamed, her voice echoing through the empty store. "Somebody help us!" With trembling hands, Maggie fumbled for her phone, nearly dropping it twice before managing to dial 911. "Please," she begged into the phone, her voice shaking. "My sister, I think she's having a heart attack. Please hurry!" Cleo's breathing came in short, painful gasps. Maggie held her sister's hand, feeling completely helpless as they waited for the ambulance. "Stay with me, Cleo," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "Please, stay with me." The wail of sirens grew louder, and through the window, Maggie could see the flash of red and blue lights. Everything after that became a blur of paramedics, questions she could barely answer, and the terrifying sight of her sister being lifted onto a stretcher. As they rushed Cleo out to the waiting ambulance, Maggie stood in the doorway of her bookstore, her safe haven now feeling more like a prison than ever before. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking, and her heart hammered against her ribs as she watched the ambulance doors close on her sister's pale face. The steady beep of hospital monitors filled the sterile room as Maggie sat beside her sister's bed, clutching Cleo's hand. The white hospital sheets made Cleo look smaller, more fragile than Maggie had ever seen her. Gone was the fierce, unstoppable force that had always pushed Maggie to do more, be more. "Stop looking at me like that," Cleo said, her voice hoarse, but still carrying that familiar spark of determination. "I'm not dead yet." Maggie's eyes welled up with tears. "This is all my fault. If I hadn't been so stubborn about the trip—" "Don't you dare blame yourself," Cleo interrupted, squeezing Maggie's hand with what little strength she had. "My ticker's been giving me trouble for years. You know that." The afternoon sun filtered through the hospital window, casting long shadows across the room. A nurse came in to check Cleo's vitals, offering a sympathetic smile before leaving them alone again. "But maybe if I'd just agreed to go—" Maggie's voice cracked. "Listen to me," Cleo said, her tone growing serious. "This isn't about the trip anymore. This is about you, Maggie. You've spent years hiding in that bookstore of yours." Maggie shifted uncomfortably in the hard plastic chair. "I'm not hiding. I'm living my life." "Are you?" Cleo's eyes bore into her sister's. "When was the last time you did something that scared you? Something that made you feel truly alive?" The question hung heavy in the air. Maggie stared at her hands, unable to remember. "Life isn't meant to be lived in such small spaces, sister," Cleo continued, her voice softening. "I've watched you shrink your world smaller and smaller since Tom died. It breaks my heart." "I'm comfortable with my life," Maggie protested weakly. "Comfortable isn't the same as happy." Cleo's words hit home, making Maggie's chest tighten. "You deserve so much more than just comfortable." A doctor entered the room, clipboard in hand. Both sisters fell silent as he reviewed Cleo's charts. "Mrs. Peterson," he addressed Cleo, "your condition is stable, but you're going to need extensive recovery time, at least 6 to 8 weeks of rest and rehabilitation." Maggie felt her sister's hand tighten around hers. "What about travel?" Cleo asked, her voice steady. "I have a friend." The doctor shook his head firmly. "I'm sorry, but any long-distance travel is out of the question for the foreseeable future. You need to focus on getting your strength back." After the doctor left, Cleo turned to Maggie with fierce determination in her eyes. "You have to go, Maggie. You have to go see Holly for me." "Cleo, I can't." "Yes, you can," Cleo insisted, her voice stronger than it had been all day. "Holly doesn't have much time left. Someone needs to be there to say goodbye for both of us. It has to be you." "But I wouldn't know what to say, what to do." "Just be yourself." Cleo's eyes softened. "Maybe this is exactly what you need. A chance to break free, to remember who you are beyond those bookstore walls." Maggie felt the weight of her sister's words, the truth in them she'd been avoiding for so long. She looked at Cleo, lying in that hospital bed, still trying to push her toward a fuller life, and felt something shift inside her. "Promise me," Cleo said, her voice quiet but intense. "Promise me you'll go." Maggie stood in front of her bedroom closet, staring at clothes she hadn't touched in years. Dust particles danced in the morning sunlight streaming through her window. Her hands trembled as she pulled out an old duffel bag from the top shelf, sending a cascade of forgotten items tumbling down. "When was the last time I even went anywhere?" she muttered, catching a faded travel guidebook from 1995. The bag still had its price tag attached. She'd bought it years ago, planning a trip she never took. Maggie sank onto her bed, clutching the bag to her chest. Cleo's words echoed in her mind. "You need to live, Maggie. Really live." She began sorting through her clothes, creating neat piles on her floral bedspread. Everything seemed wrong. Too old, too formal, or just not suitable for a long drive. The task of packing felt enormous, like trying to climb a mountain with no equipment. In her drawer, she found an old road map, its creases worn and yellowing. Her finger traced the route she would need to take, and her stomach tightened. The distance looked impossibly far on paper. "One step at a time," she whispered to herself, remembering how she'd tell her customers the same thing when they felt overwhelmed by life's challenges. After 3 hours of sorting and folding, Maggie had managed to pack exactly 3 outfits and some basic toiletries. The duffel bag looked pathetically empty. She zipped it up anyway, knowing she'd probably repack it at least twice more before leaving. Her next task felt even more daunting. The old Buick in her garage hadn't been on a long trip in years. It had served her well for grocery runs and short drives to the bookstore, but crossing multiple states? That was different. Maggie drove slowly through town to Miller's auto shop, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. The familiar streets felt different today, as if she was seeing them through the eyes of someone about to leave them behind. The auto shop's parking lot was full, cars in various states of repair scattered about. The air smelled of oil and rubber. A bell chimed as she pushed open the heavy glass door, stepping into the small office space. "Be right with you," called a gruff voice from the garage area. Maggie settled into a worn plastic chair, clutching her purse tightly. The waiting area walls were covered with calendars featuring motorcycles and vintage cars. A coffee maker gurgled in the corner, producing a smell that reminded her of her cafe. Heavy footsteps approached, and a tall man appeared in the doorway. His gray hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and his arms were covered in faded tattoos. Despite his intimidating size, his eyes were kind, crinkling at the corners as he wiped his hands on a red shop rag. "How can I help you?" His voice was unexpectedly gentle. I need my car checked," Maggie said, her voice smaller than she intended. "I'm planning a long trip." He nodded, studying her face. "I'm Ryder. Don't usually see you around here." "Maggie, I run the bookstore on Oak Street." She found herself relaxing slightly, surprised by his calm demeanor. "I normally take my car to Jim's, but they're closed this week." "Ah, the Book Nook. Best coffee in town, from what I hear." He smiled, and the tattoo of an eagle on his forearm seemed to shift. "Let's take a look at your car. Want some coffee while you wait?" Something in his manner, perhaps the careful way he moved, or the thoughtful pause before he spoke, made Maggie feel oddly at ease. She accepted the coffee, watching as he walked out to inspect her Buick, his movements deliberate and sure. Sitting there, holding the chipped mug of surprisingly good coffee, Maggie felt a small knot of tension in her chest begin to loosen. The morning sun painted long shadows across Maggie's driveway as she locked her front door, triple-checking it out of habit. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her car keys, the weight of what she was about to do settling heavily on her shoulders. "Just breathe," she whispered to herself, the same words she'd told countless customers who came to her bookstore seeking comfort. Now she needed that comfort herself. The familiar streets of her small town slowly gave way to open road. Maggie gripped the steering wheel tighter, watching the buildings grow smaller in her rearview mirror. Her carefully organized life, the bookstore, her daily routines, even her favorite reading chair, all faded into the distance. Fields of corn stretched endlessly on either side of the highway, their golden tops swaying in the breeze. It was beautiful, she had to admit, even if it made her stomach twist with anxiety. The radio played softly, old country songs that reminded her of simpler times. "You can do this, Maggie," she said aloud, forcing herself to loosen her death grip on the steering wheel. "Cleo needs you to do this." 3 hours into her journey, the landscape changed. Rolling hills replaced the flat farmland, and the 2-lane highway curved through patches of dense woods. It was unlike anything she'd seen in years, and despite her nervousness, a tiny spark of excitement flickered in her chest. The first sign something was wrong came with a slight shudder in the steering wheel. Maggie frowned, remembering her recent visit to the mechanic. The shudder grew stronger, accompanied by an alarming rattle from somewhere under the hood. "No, no, no," Maggie pleaded, as white smoke began seeping from under the hood. Her heart racing, she guided the car to the shoulder of the road, where it gave one final shudder before dying completely. Maggie sat there, hands still gripping the wheel, trying to keep her breathing steady. She was miles from the nearest town, with only trees and empty roads stretching in both directions. Her cell phone showed 1 bar of service, barely enough to make a call. As panic began to rise in her chest, the distant rumble of a motorcycle caught her attention. The sound grew louder, and Maggie's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the rider. Ryder pulled his motorcycle onto the shoulder behind her car, the chrome on his Harley gleaming in the midday sun. He switched off the engine and approached her window, his boots crunching on the gravel. Despite his intimidating size and the tattoos visible beneath his rolled-up sleeves, his expression was gentle. "Car trouble?" he asked, removing his sunglasses. His eyes were kind. Not at all what she'd expected from a former Hell's Angel. "It just died," Maggie explained, her voice shakier than she'd intended. "I don't know what happened. It was fine when I left." Ryder nodded, studying her face for a moment. "Pop the hood for me," he requested, already walking to the front of the car. "I might be able to help." Maggie found the hood release with trembling fingers. As she watched Ryder examine her engine through the rearview mirror, she couldn't help but notice how different he seemed from the gruff mechanic she'd met back in town. There was something almost graceful about the way his weathered hands moved over the engine components. "Mind if I ask where you're headed?" he called out, glancing up from the engine. The afternoon sun beat down on the deserted highway as Maggie stood beside her stalled car, watching Ryder pop open the hood. A cloud of steam rose into the air, making her squint. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling strangely vulnerable out here in the middle of nowhere. "Radiator hose," Ryder muttered, his weathered hands moving with surprising gentleness over the engine parts. "Burst clean through." He glanced at her, his eyes kind despite his gruff exterior. "Got a spare in my kit. Won't take long to fix." Maggie nodded, not quite sure what to say. She watched as he worked, noticing how his tattooed arms moved with precise efficiency. Each movement seemed practiced, purposeful. The leather vest he wore over his t-shirt had seen better days, but it was well cared for, like everything else about him. "You've been doing this a long time," she said, breaking the silence. Ryder gave a slight smile, not looking up from his work. "Since I was knee-high to a grasshopper, as my old man used to say." He paused, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. "Started with bicycles, moved up to motorcycles, then cars. Engines make sense to me. They're honest. Something's either broken or it ain't." His words struck a chord with Maggie. She thought about her bookstore, how she'd surrounded herself with stories but kept her own life so carefully controlled. "I understand that," she said softly. "Books are like that too. They're reliable, predictable." Ryder looked up at her then, really looked at her, and Maggie felt seen in a way she hadn't in years. "Life ain't always got to be predictable though, does it?" His voice was gentle, lacking any judgment. They worked together for the next 20 minutes, Ryder explaining what he was doing as Maggie handed him tools from his kit. His patience surprised her. There was no condescension in his voice, just a genuine desire to share his knowledge. "There," he said finally, closing the hood with a satisfied nod. "That'll hold for now, but..." He hesitated, wiping his hands on a rag. "You're headed west, right? Next town's about 60 miles out. This fix is temporary. You'll need proper repairs before going much further." Maggie's heart sank. She'd barely started her journey, and already things were going wrong. Her hands twisted together nervously. "I can give you a ride," Ryder offered, gesturing to his motorcycle. "Got my truck coming up behind with a tow hitch. My buddy Jake's bringing it. We can take your car to the shop in Milton." Maggie hesitated, years of caution warring with her immediate need. She looked at Ryder, really looked at him. Beyond the tattoos and leather, she saw something else. Compassion in his eyes, steadiness in his manner, and a gentleness that seemed at odds with his appearance, but somehow felt completely genuine. I don't want to be any trouble," she said quietly. Ryder shook his head. "No trouble. Been doing this kind of thing for years. Sometimes folks just need a helping hand." He paused, then added softly, "We all do, from time to time." The simple truth in those words made Maggie's eyes sting. After a moment's consideration, she nodded. "Thank you," she said. I would appreciate the ride. Ryder's face softened into a smile. Let me make a quick call to Jake, and we'll get you sorted out. He pulled out his phone, and Maggie watched him, still uncertain about accepting help from a stranger, but somehow knowing, deep down, that she could trust this rough-edged man with the gentle hands and kind eyes. The rumble of Ryder's motorcycle filled the afternoon air as they cruised down the empty highway. Maggie held on to him, her initial nervousness giving way to an unexpected sense of peace. The countryside rolled past in waves of golden wheat fields and patches of wild sunflowers, their heads nodding in the warm breeze. At a rest stop, they paused for water. Maggie smoothed her wind-blown hair, watching Ryder as he leaned against his bike. The sun caught the silver in his beard, and his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Never thought I'd be on the back of a motorcycle at my age, Maggie said, shaking her head with a small laugh. Age is just a number. Ryder's voice was gentle, despite its roughness. Life's got a way of surprising us when we least expect it. Speaking from experience? Maggie asked, curiosity getting the better of her. Ryder was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. Yeah, you could say that. Spent 20 years with the Hells Angels. Thought that was my whole life, you know? Then one day... He paused, running a hand through his gray hair. One day I watched a young kid get hurt real bad in a fight that didn't need to happen. Made me realize I was on the wrong path. Maggie listened, feeling the weight of his words. That must have been hard, leaving everything behind. Hardest thing I ever did, but also the best. He smiled, a genuine warmth in his expression. Started fixing bikes instead of riding with the gang. Found out I was pretty good at it, too. They got back on the road, the conversation flowing easier now. Maggie told him about her bookstore, about Cleo, about the years she'd spent building walls around her heart. The words came naturally, carried away by the wind and the steady rhythm of the motorcycle. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Ryder pulled into the parking lot of a small roadside diner. The neon sign buzzed quietly, casting a warm glow over the chrome and glass exterior. Inside, they settled into a worn vinyl booth. The waitress, her name tag reading Betty, brought them coffee without asking. The diner smelled of fresh pie and grilled onions, comfortable and familiar. So what made you finally decide to make this trip? Ryder asked, stirring sugar into his coffee. Maggie wrapped her hands around her warm mug. My sister's heart attack, I suppose, but it's more than that. She paused, searching for the right words. I've spent so long being careful, being safe. Maybe too long. Ryder nodded, understanding in his eyes. Sometimes the scariest journeys turn out to be the most important ones. They ordered meatloaf for him, chicken pot pie for her. The food was simple but good, and they ate in companionable silence, broken only by the soft clink of silverware and the quiet conversations of other diners. As they finished their meal, Maggie caught herself smiling more easily than she had in years. Something was shifting inside her, like ice melting in spring. Ryder seemed to sense it too, giving her a gentle, knowing smile across the table that reached all the way to his eyes. The familiar fear was still there, but it felt different now. Less like a wall, and more like a door waiting to be opened. The morning sun peeked through the motel curtains, casting a warm glow across Maggie's face. She opened her eyes slowly, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings of her small room. For the first time in years, her usual morning anxiety was replaced by an unexpected sense of calm. Maggie sat up in bed, running her fingers through her silver hair. The worn, quilted bedspread felt soft beneath her hands. Through the thin walls, she could hear the distant rumble of trucks on the highway, and the cheerful chirping of birds outside her window. After getting dressed, she stepped outside into the crisp morning air. Ryder was already awake, leaning against his motorcycle, a paper cup of coffee in his weathered hands. He had another cup waiting for her on the nearby picnic table. "Sleep okay?" he asked, his voice gentle despite its natural gruffness. "Better than I have in a long time," Maggie admitted, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "Thank you for the coffee." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. Ryder seemed lost in thought, his expression more serious than usual. "Got something on your mind?" Maggie asked, surprising herself with her directness. Ryder took a long sip of his coffee before responding. "Got word about an old friend last night. Tommy." He paused, his fingers tightening around the cup. "We rode together back in the day. He's in pretty bad shape. Doctors say it's cancer." Maggie watched as Ryder's tough exterior softened slightly. "Known him long?" 25 years. Ryder's voice grew quiet. "He was there for me during some real rough times. Kept me from going too far down some dangerous paths, even though we were both living pretty wild back then." The morning breeze rustled through the nearby trees as Maggie absorbed this new piece of Ryder's past. She could see the weight of it in his shoulders, the way his eyes seemed focused on something far away. They finished their coffee and packed up their few belongings. As Maggie secured her bag on the back of Ryder's motorcycle, his phone rang. The sharp electronic tone cut through the peaceful morning air. Ryder answered, his expression growing more serious with each passing second. "Yeah, I hear you," he said into the phone. "How long?" He listened intently, running a hand through his gray-streaked hair. "Okay, I'll be there." He ended the call and turned to Maggie, his face etched with concern. "That was Tommy's sister. He's taken a turn for the worse." He hesitated, clearly torn. "I need to head north to see him. It's not looking good." Maggie felt her heart sink, but she understood. "Of course you need to go. I can drop you at the next town. There's a bus station there. It'll get you where you need to go." Ryder's eyes met hers, filled with genuine regret. "I'm sorry to leave you like this." "Don't be," Maggie said firmly, though she felt a flutter of uncertainty in her stomach. "Some things are more important than playing tour guide to a stranger." "You're not just a stranger anymore, Maggie," Ryder said quietly. They rode to the next town in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. At the bus station, Ryder helped Maggie with her bags, his movements slower than usual, as if reluctant to leave. "Take care of yourself, Maggie," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "And thank you for understanding." Maggie watched as he mounted his motorcycle, the engine roaring to life. As he pulled away, she felt a mix of gratitude for the kindness he'd shown her and a hollow sensation in her chest that she wasn't quite ready to examine. The steering wheel felt different under Maggie's hands now that she was alone. The sun cast long shadows across the empty passenger seat where Ryder had been sitting just hours before. His last words echoed in her mind. "I'm sorry, but I have to go. My friend needs me." She glanced at her map spread across the dashboard, held down by her water bottle. The highlighted route showed another 3 hours to Holly's house. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the wheel tighter. "Maybe I should just turn around," she whispered to herself, the words hanging heavy in the quiet car. The familiar pull of her comfort zone tugged at her heart, promising safety and routine back at her bookstore. A truck rumbled past, making her jump. Maggie took a deep breath and remembered Cleo's words at the hospital. "Don't let fear stop you anymore, sis." She straightened her shoulders, and pressed down on the gas pedal. The landscape changed as she drove, flat farmlands giving way to gentle rolling hills. She passed small towns with their downtown squares and weekend farmers markets. Each mile marker brought her closer to Holly, but also further from everything familiar. Her thoughts drifted to Ryder. There had been something genuine in his eyes when he'd told her about his dying friend. She understood now. Everyone had their own battles to fight, their own promises to keep. The GPS chirped, announcing another turn. Holly's neighborhood appeared exactly as she remembered it from their college days. Neat rows of ranch-style homes with well-tended gardens. Her heart began to race as she counted down the house numbers. 215, 217. Maggie's voice quivered. There it is, 219. She pulled into the driveway of a pale yellow house with white trim. Flower boxes hung from every window, bursting with cheerful petunias. It was so perfectly Holly that tears sprang to Maggie's eyes. Before she could reach for her purse, the front door opened. Holly stood in the doorway, thinner than Maggie remembered, but with the same warm smile that had made them instant friends in college. She wore a colorful headscarf that somehow made her look both fragile and strong. "Maggie," Holly called out, her voice carrying across the yard. "You actually came." Maggie hurried up the path, her legs shaking. When they embraced, it felt like no time had passed at all. Holly's hug was gentler than it used to be, but it held the same love. "Look at you," Holly said, pulling back to study Maggie's face. "Still beautiful as ever." They made their way inside, Holly leaning slightly on Maggie's arm. The living room was cozy, with sunshine streaming through lace curtains and family photos covering every surface. They settled onto a plush floral sofa, their shoulders touching like they used to do during late-night study sessions. "Remember that awful poetry class we took sophomore year?" Holly asked, reaching for Maggie's hand. Maggie laughed, the sound surprising her with its ease. "How could I forget? You insisted on reading every poem in a British accent. And you always brought those peanut butter cookies from the campus bakery," Holly added, her eyes twinkling. They sat there, trading memories back and forth, their words bridging the decades that had separated them. Holly's illness hung unspoken between them, but for now, they were just two friends catching up, their laughter mixing with the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. The morning sun filtered through Holly's kitchen window as Maggie prepared breakfast for both of them. Holly sat at the small wooden table, wrapped in a soft fleece blanket despite the warmth of the day. Her face was pale, but her eyes still sparkled with life. "Maggie, dear," Holly's voice was gentle but firm, "you can't spend every minute hovering over me like a mother hen." Maggie placed a bowl of oatmeal in front of Holly. "I'm not hovering. I'm just making sure you eat properly." Holly reached out and caught Maggie's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "We both know that's not true. You're using me as an excuse to hide from the world again." Maggie's shoulders slumped. She pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." Holly stirred her oatmeal slowly. "This beautiful town has so much to offer. Art galleries, cafes, the park by the river. You haven't seen any of it." "I came here to spend time with you," Maggie protested. Holly's laugh was warm but tired. "And I'm telling you to go out, live a little. That's what this whole journey is about, isn't it?" Maggie thought about Ryder, about the unexpected freedom she'd felt on the road. "I suppose... No supposing. I'm going to take my morning nap anyway." Holly's tone left no room for argument. "Take my house key and go explore. I insist." An hour later, Maggie found herself walking down Main Street. The town was smaller than her own, but it had a charm she couldn't deny. Flower baskets hung from old-fashioned lampposts, and the sidewalks were lined with blooming cherry trees. She passed several shops, their windows filled with local artwork and handmade crafts. The aroma of fresh coffee drew her attention to a cafe, reminding her of her own bookstore back home. Following Holly's suggestion, Maggie made her way to the Riverside Park. The path wound through carefully tended gardens, and benches were placed strategically to capture the best views of the water. As she rounded a bend, she stopped short. A familiar face caught her attention. Sarah Mitchell, someone she'd known from her college days with Holly. Sarah was sitting on a bench, feeding breadcrumbs to a group of eager ducks. "Sarah?" Maggie called out hesitantly. The woman looked up, confusion crossing her face before recognition dawned. "Maggie? Maggie Thompson? Is that really you?" They embraced awkwardly, then sat together on the bench. Sarah looked older, of course, but her warm smile hadn't changed. "I'm here visiting Holly," Maggie explained. Sarah's face softened. "Yes, I heard about her illness. I've been meaning to visit, but—" She trailed off, looking out over the river. "But what? Life gets complicated, doesn't it?" Sarah sighed. "After Tom died, I barely left my house for 2 years. Everything seemed too big, too overwhelming." Maggie felt a jolt of recognition. "How did you get past it?" "One small step at a time." Sarah tossed another handful of breadcrumbs to the ducks. "I started with short walks, like this one. Then I joined a book club, made myself talk to people again." She turned to face Maggie. The hardest part was admitting that being afraid of living wasn't the same as being safe. Maggie's throat tightened. She thought about her bookstore, her careful routines, the walls she'd built around herself. "I think I know what you mean." "It's never too late to start over," Sarah said quietly, "to choose a different path." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the ducks paddle across the water. Maggie felt something shift inside her, like a key turning in a long, rusted lock. She thought about Cleo's words, about Holly's gentle pushing, about Ryder's unexpected kindness. Maybe they had all been trying to tell her the same thing. Maggie sat at the small desk in Holly's guest room, her fingers tracing the leather cover of the journal she'd bought on impulse at a gas station. Morning sunlight filtered through lace curtains, casting delicate shadows across the pages. She hadn't written in years, but something about this moment felt right. Her pen hovered over the blank page before touching down. "I've been hiding," she wrote, the words coming easier than expected. "Not just from others, but from myself." The quiet of the room wrapped around her like a familiar blanket, but for the first time, she recognized it as both comfort and cage. She thought about her bookstore back home, how she'd arranged every detail to keep the world at a safe distance. Books had been her shield, her excuse to stay apart from others while still feeling connected. "I watched life happen through other people's stories," she continued writing, her handwriting growing steadier. "I helped customers find adventures in books while refusing to have any of my own. Memories of missed opportunities flooded back. Invitations declined, friendships left to wither, dreams tucked away on high shelves like rarely opened books." The loss of her husband had been her turning point, the moment she'd decided that loving meant losing, and losing hurt too much. "But what hurts more," she wrote, "the pain of loss or the emptiness of never trying?" Her thoughts drifted to Ryder, how his gruff exterior had cracked to reveal such genuine kindness. She'd been ready to dismiss him based on appearances, just as she'd dismissed so many chances for connection over the years. Maggie paused, dabbing at unexpected tears with her sleeve. The morning light had shifted, warming her hands as she wrote. "I've been so afraid of being hurt that I forgot how to be brave. I forgot how to live." She thought about Cleo in the hospital, about Holly's illness, about all the precious time slipping away. Her pen moved faster now, keeping pace with her thoughts. Time doesn't wait for fear to pass. It just keeps moving, taking chances with it. The sound of birds outside the window caught her attention. A pair of cardinals flitted between branches, their red feathers bright against the green leaves. They reminded her of Holly's words from yesterday. Life is too short to watch it from behind glass. Maggie set down her pen, feeling lighter somehow. She was ready to talk to Holly, to finally address the weight of their shared past and the regrets they'd both carried. Just then, her phone buzzed on the desk. Ryder's name appeared on the screen, making her heart skip. Opening the message, she read, "Lost my old friend last night. He went peaceful. Thank you for understanding why I had to go." Maggie's hand trembled as she set the phone down. The words in her journal seemed to take on new meaning. Time really didn't wait. She touched the last line she'd written, the ink barely dry. It's never too late to start living. Through the window, the cardinal pair had vanished, leaving only empty branches swaying in the morning breeze. She closed the journal slowly, her mind full of Ryder's loss and her own impending conversation with Holly. Maggie sat in Holly's sunlit living room, twisting the phone message in her hands. Ryder's words were brief, almost clinical. "Lost an old friend today. Need some time." Her heart ached, not just for his loss, but for the wall she felt him building between them. Holly watched her from her comfortable armchair, a knowing look in her tired eyes. "You're thinking about him again, aren't you?" Maggie sighed, letting the paper fall into her lap. "Am I that obvious?" "Only to someone who's known you for 40 years. Holly's voice was gentle but firm. "You're doing that thing again? Where you expect the worst because it feels safer than hoping." The truth of Holly's words stung. Maggie stood up and walked to the window, watching leaves dance in the autumn breeze. I thought we had connected, but now he's pulling away, and you're afraid," Holly finished for her. "Maggie, when are you going to stop letting fear make your decisions?" Maggie turned, surprised by the directness in Holly's tone. Her friend sat straighter in her chair, her face animated despite her illness. "You came here to see me," Holly continued, "to fulfill a promise to your sister. That's what matters right now. Whatever happens with Ryder, that's his journey. You need to focus on yours." "But no buts." Holly patted the seat beside her. "Come here." Maggie sat down, and Holly took her hand. The familiar gesture brought tears to her eyes. "Life isn't about controlling every outcome," Holly said softly. "It's about being present for each moment, even the difficult ones. Especially the difficult ones." Maggie squeezed Holly's hand, feeling the frailty beneath her fingers. "I'm scared of losing people," she admitted, "of being left behind." "Oh, sweetheart." Holly's eyes were bright with understanding. "That's the price of loving. But it's worth it. Every single time." They sat in silence for a moment, the afternoon sun warming their faces. Then Holly spoke again, her voice thick with emotion. "You know what I regret most? The chances I didn't take, the love I didn't express, the adventures I postponed until it was too late." She looked directly at Maggie. "Don't make my mistakes." Maggie felt tears rolling down her cheeks. "I don't know how to change. I've been this way so long." "You already are changing," Holly insisted. "Look at you. You're here, aren't you? You left your comfortable little bookstore. You trusted a stranger. You're facing your past." She smiled. "The Maggie I knew 20 years ago would never have done any of that." The words sank in, and Maggie felt something shift inside her. Holly was right. She had changed, was still changing. Maybe that was okay. "Life is so unpredictable," Holly continued, wiping away her own tears. "That's what makes it beautiful. Every sunrise is different. Every person we meet changes us in some way. Even the heartaches shape us into something new. Maggie looked at her old friend, seeing both the vibrant young woman she'd known in college and the wise soul before her now. "I'm so glad I came," she whispered. "Me too." Holly's smile was radiant despite her pallor. "Now promise me something. Promise me you'll stop hiding from life. Promise me you'll embrace it, all of it, even when it scares you." Looking into Holly's earnest face, Maggie felt a surge of determination. She wasn't just making this promise to Holly, she was making it to herself. "I promise," she said firmly, and for the first time in years, she felt truly ready to mean it. Maggie sat in Holly's garden, watching the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the flower beds. The sweet scent of roses filled the air, but even their beauty couldn't lift the heaviness in her heart. She'd been here for 3 days now, and while Holly's condition remained stable, Maggie felt stuck between two worlds: the safe harbor of her bookstore and this unfamiliar territory of emotional vulnerability. "You're awfully quiet today," Holly said from her wheelchair, her thin hands wrapped around a teacup. Despite her illness, her eyes remained sharp and knowing. "Just thinking," Maggie replied, shifting in her chair. The metal creaked beneath her. "Maybe it's time for me to head back home. The bookstore needs me and what?" Holly's voice was gentle but firm. "What's really bothering you, Maggie?" Maggie stared at her hands, noticing how they resembled her mother's now, age spots and all. "I don't know what I'm doing here anymore. I came because Cleo couldn't, but now—" She trailed off, unable to put her feelings into words. "Now you're faced with all the things you've been running from," Holly finished for her. She set her teacup down with a slight rattle. Inside the house, the grandfather clock chimed 5 times. Maggie counted each dong, using them to steady her racing thoughts. "I keep thinking about Ryder," she admitted. "How he just left. And then that message about his friend passing away. I feel silly for caring so much about someone I barely know." Holly reached across the small garden table and touched Maggie's arm. Her skin felt paper-thin, but warm. "It's not silly to care, Maggie. It's what makes us human." The evening breeze rustled through the garden, carrying the scent of approaching rain. Maggie pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. "I've spent so long keeping everything neat and organized in my life. The bookstore, my routine, everything in its place. But now it's all messy and uncomfortable," Holly said with understanding. "That's how life is supposed to be sometimes." Later that evening, Maggie helped Holly inside and got her settled for the night. She wandered through the house's quiet halls, looking at old photographs on the walls. Many showed younger versions of Holly, Cleo, and herself, all smiling, full of dreams and possibilities. When had she stopped believing in those possibilities? In her guest room, Maggie sat on the edge of the bed, unable to sleep. The digital clock on the nightstand showed 11:42 p.m. She picked up her phone, scrolling through her recent calls. Cleo's name appeared several times, along with the single message from Ryder about his friend's passing. She hadn't replied, hadn't known what to say. Rolling onto her side, Maggie listened to the house's unfamiliar creaks and groans. Her own bed at home would be perfectly made, her favorite pillow in just the right spot. Everything would be predictable, safe. Cleo's words from the hospital echoed in her mind. "Don't let fear keep you small, Maggie. Life's too precious for that." The moonlight filtered through the curtains, creating patterns on the wall that reminded her of the shadows in her bookstore. But this wasn't her bookstore, and she wasn't the same person who had left it behind a week ago. Sleep felt distant as her mind wandered between thoughts of home and the uncertainty that lay ahead. Maggie turned over, punching her pillow into a more comfortable shape. The urge to pack her bags and drive home in the morning was strong, but Cleo's voice in her head was stronger. She had to stay, not just for Holly or Cleo, but for herself. Even if she didn't know what tomorrow would bring. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of Holly's guest room as Maggie sat on the edge of her bed, holding a pale blue envelope. Her hands trembled slightly as she recognized Cleo's distinctive handwriting. Taking a deep breath, she carefully opened the letter. "My dearest sister." Cleo's words jumped off the page. "I know this journey hasn't been easy for you. The doctors say I'm getting stronger each day, but my heart aches knowing I couldn't make this trip with you. Still, I want you to know how proud I am that you found the courage to go." Maggie's vision blurred with tears as she continued reading. "Remember when we were little, and you were afraid to jump into the lake? I held your hand then, just like I wish I could hold it now. But you're stronger than you think, Maggie. You always have been." The letter crinkled softly as Maggie's grip tightened. "Life isn't about waiting for the perfect moment," Cleo wrote. "It's about making moments perfect, even when they're messy and scary. Don't let fear hold you back anymore. You've already proven you're braver than you ever imagined." A warm breeze rustled the curtains, carrying the sweet scent of Holly's garden. Maggie folded the letter carefully and pressed it to her chest, feeling her sister's love wrap around her like a warm blanket. Rising from the bed, she walked to the window and looked out at the flowering cherry trees in Holly's backyard. The pink blossoms reminded her of the ones that grew outside their childhood home. Cleo was right. She had come so far already. A sudden commotion from down the hall snapped Maggie from her thoughts. Holly's nurse called out urgently, "Miss Maggie, come quick!" Maggie's heart lurched as she rushed to Holly's room. Her friend lay pale against the white pillows, her breathing labored. The nurse worked efficiently, checking vital signs and adjusting medication. "What's happening?" Maggie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Her blood pressure's dropping," the nurse explained gently. "I've called the doctor." Maggie pulled a chair close to Holly's bedside and took her friend's fragile hand. Holly's eyes fluttered open, meeting Maggie's worried gaze. "Don't look so scared," Holly whispered, her voice weak but warm. "I'm not going anywhere just yet." Maggie squeezed her hand gently. "I'm right here, Holly. I'm not going anywhere either." The morning stretched into afternoon as Maggie maintained her vigil. She read aloud from Holly's favorite book, shared old college memories, and simply sat in companionable silence when Holly needed rest. The doctor came and went, making adjustments to Holly's care, his face grave but kind. Through it all, Cleo's words echoed in Maggie's mind. Life isn't about waiting for the perfect moment. This moment was far from perfect, but Maggie knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across Holly's room, Maggie noticed her friend's breathing becoming more shallow. Holly's eyes opened, searching for Maggie's face. "Talk to me," Holly whispered. "Tell me about your bookstore." Maggie leaned closer, still holding Holly's hand. She described the morning light streaming through the shop windows, the smell of fresh coffee mingling with old books, and the regular customers who had become like family. Her voice remained steady, even as her heart ached. The nurse moved quietly around them, checking monitors and adjusting Holly's pillows. Outside, a bird sang its evening song, a sweet melody floating through the open window. Maggie kept talking, her presence a constant anchor in the gathering darkness. Sunlight streamed through the thin curtains of Holly's bedroom, casting a warm glow across the quilted bedspread. Maggie sat in the worn armchair beside Holly's bed, their hands intertwined. Holly's fingers were thin and fragile now, but her grip remained surprisingly firm. Do you remember that silly road trip we took during spring break? Holly's voice was soft, but clear. The one where we got lost in that tiny town in Nebraska? Maggie smiled, the memory washing over her. Of course. We ended up sleeping in your old Volkswagen because we couldn't find a motel. But we laughed all night, Holly said, her eyes twinkling. We were so young, so fearless then. Maggie felt a familiar tightness in her throat. We were different people back then. No, Holly shook her head gently. You're still that same brave girl, Maggie. You've just forgotten her somewhere along the way. The room fell quiet, except for the gentle ticking of the bedside clock. Outside, birds chirped their morning songs, oblivious to the weight of the moment inside. I've watched you these past few days, Holly continued. The way you dropped everything to come here, how you've faced your fears about traveling alone. That brave girl is still there. Tears welled up in Maggie's eyes. I've spent so many years playing it safe, Holly. After Tom died, I just stopped trying. Holly squeezed her hand. Promise me something, Maggie. Anything. Promise me you won't live in fear anymore. Holly's voice grew stronger, more insistent. Promise me you'll remember the girl who wasn't afraid to sleep in a broken-down Volkswagen and laugh about it. Maggie wiped her eyes with her free hand. I promise, Holly. Being here, it's already changed me. I can feel it. I know, Holly smiled. I can see it too. You're ready to live again. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Holly's breathing became slower, more measured. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. Tell me about that motorcycle man again. Maggie couldn't help but laugh softly. Ryder, he's complicated. Life is complicated, dear. That's what makes it beautiful. Holly's eyes began to drift closed, but her smile remained. I'm so glad you came, Maggie. So glad to see you becoming yourself again. Holly? Maggie leaned forward, still holding her friend's hand. I'm just resting my eyes for a moment, Holly murmured. Stay with me? Of course, Maggie whispered. The room grew quieter, filled only with the sound of Holly's increasingly shallow breaths. Maggie watched as her friend's chest rose and fell, each breath becoming softer than the last. The morning light continued to fill the room, and somewhere in those peaceful moments, Holly slipped away. Maggie sat there, still holding Holly's hand, tears rolling down her cheeks. But beneath the sadness, she felt something else, a profound sense of peace. Holly had given her one final gift, the courage to embrace life again. Thank you, Maggie whispered, gently placing Holly's hand on the quilt. She stood up slowly, looking at her friend's peaceful face. The promise she'd made echoed in her mind, not as a burden, but as a beacon of hope. Holly's life had been full of courage and joy, even in its final chapters. Now it was Maggie's turn to honor that legacy by living her own life fully. The morning sun cast long shadows across the winding path as Maggie drove toward Eagle Point, a local landmark Holly had often mentioned in their conversations. Her rental car hugged the curves of the mountain road, each turn bringing her higher above the valley below. The trees swayed in the strong wind, their leaves dancing like thousands of tiny flags. Maggie pulled into the nearly empty parking lot and stepped out of her car. The wind whipped at her cardigan, and she wrapped it tighter around herself. The air felt different up here, cleaner, sharper, more alive. It reminded her of those rare moments when she'd venture outside her comfort zone, like that first day with Ryder on the road. Following the marked trail, she made her way to the observation point. Her shoes crunched against the gravel path as the wind grew stronger, carrying the sweet scent of pine and wild sage. The trees seemed to whisper secrets in the breeze, their branches bending and straightening like they were nodding to her. I hear you, she said softly, surprising herself. I'm listening now. At the viewing platform, Maggie gripped the wooden railing and looked out over the vast landscape. Below, the town looked like a collection of toy houses, and the roads were mere threads weaving through the countryside. Up here, her problems felt smaller, more manageable. She closed her eyes and let the wind wash over her. Holly's last words echoed in her mind. Promise me you'll live, Maggie. Really live. The memory brought fresh tears, but they felt different now. Not bitter, but cleansing. A sudden gust of wind made her eyes flutter open. Above her, clouds drifted across the blue sky, shifting and changing shape. As she watched, they seemed to form letters, first an L, then an I, then a V, and finally an E. Maggie blinked, and the word disappeared, only to be replaced by what looked like love. Her heart quickened as a third message appeared. Let go. Live, love, let go, Maggie whispered, her voice carried away by the wind. She knew it was just clouds, just her mind finding patterns where there were none, but it didn't matter. The message felt real, felt right. It was exactly what she needed to see, exactly when she needed to see it. Standing there on Eagle Point, Maggie felt something shift inside her. The fear that had kept her tethered to her bookstore for so many years began to loosen its grip. She thought about Cleo in the hospital, about Holly's peaceful passing, about Ryder's unexpected kindness. Each person had shown her a different way to be brave. The wind died down to a gentle breeze, and Maggie took a deep breath. She felt lighter somehow, as if the altitude had helped her shed some invisible weight she'd been carrying. The message in the clouds had faded, but its impact remained, settling into her heart like a truth she'd always known, but forgotten. With renewed purpose, Maggie turned back toward the parking lot. She was ready to head home, but not to hide. This time she was going home to live differently, to love more openly, to finally let go of the fears that had held her back for so long. The path ahead seemed clearer now, illuminated by the morning sun and the wisdom of the wind. The morning sun painted long shadows across the empty highway as Maggie loaded her bags into her car. She paused for a moment, taking in the crisp autumn air. The world somehow looked different now, brighter, more alive. Even the old sedan that had given her so much trouble seemed ready for whatever lay ahead. You take care now, dear, Mrs. Peterson, Holly's neighbor, called from her porch. She'd been kind enough to let Maggie stay with her after Holly's passing. Maggie waved back, managing a genuine smile. The weight of loss still pressed against her chest, but it wasn't the crushing burden it had been before. Holly's last words echoed in her mind. Promise me you'll live, really live. As she pulled onto the highway, Maggie noticed how her hands felt steady on the steering wheel. Gone was the trembling uncertainty that had plagued her when she first left home. The radio played softly, an old country song about second chances that made her think of Ryder. She thought about calling Cleo to check in, but decided to wait until she found a good place to stop. Her sister would be proud of her. She knew that much. The old Maggie would have rushed straight home after Holly's passing, seeking the safety of her bookstore's familiar walls. But now she felt like taking the scenic route. The landscape rolled by, golden fields giving way to patches of woodland dressed in autumn colors. Maggie found herself humming along to the radio, something she hadn't done in years. At a red light in a small town, she caught her reflection in the rear-view mirror. The woman looking back at her seemed younger somehow, less afraid. She stopped at a quaint roadside diner for lunch, choosing a window seat where she could watch the world go by. The waitress reminded her of herself, how she used to be, efficient but withdrawn, going through the motions of life without really participating. Would you like anything else? The waitress asked, refilling her coffee cup. "No, thank you," Maggie replied, then added warmly, "But that was the best apple pie I've had in ages." The woman's face lit up with surprise and pleasure at the unexpected compliment. It was such a small thing, Maggie thought, but these little connections were what made life worth living. Holly had taught her that. Back on the road, Maggie's phone buzzed in her purse. She pulled over to answer it, expecting Cleo's voice. Instead, a familiar deep rumble filled her ear. "Maggie?" Ryder's voice carried a hint of uncertainty she'd never heard before. Her heart skipped a beat. "Ryder, I wasn't expecting to hear from you." "I know." He cleared his throat. "Listen, I heard about Holly. I'm sorry, I wanted to see you before you head home, if that's okay?" Maggie's fingers tightened around the phone. She thought about all the changes she'd been through, all the walls she'd torn down. Meeting Ryder now would be different. She was different. "Yes," she said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "I'd like that." They arranged to meet at a cafe in the next town. As Maggie hung up the phone, she felt a flutter of nervous energy in her stomach. But it wasn't the paralyzing fear she was used to. This was something else, something that felt almost like anticipation. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror one more time, smoothing her silver hair with trembling fingers. Then she started the car, ready to embrace whatever came next. The small cafe buzzed with afternoon activity as Maggie sat at a corner table, her fingers wrapped around a steaming cup of chamomile tea. Her heart skipped when she saw Ryder's tall frame in the doorway, his leather jacket worn but clean, his silver hair catching the warm light streaming through the windows. "Hey there," he said, pulling out the chair across from her. His voice was gentler than she remembered. The rough edges softened somehow. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Maggie admitted, studying his face. The lines around his eyes seemed less harsh, as if some internal burden had lifted. "Lost an old friend," Ryder said, settling into his seat. "Made me think about a lot of things. About the past, about what matters." He ordered coffee when the waitress came by, then turned back to Maggie. "How's Holly?" Maggie's eyes misted over. "She passed away peacefully, but being there with her, it changed something in me, Ryder." He reached across the table and squeezed her hand briefly. The gesture felt natural, unforced. "I can see it. You're different." "So are you," she said softly. "What happened with your friend?" Ryder's eyes grew distant. "Jake was from my old life, Hell's Angels. He was dying, wanted to make peace." He paused as the waitress set down his coffee. "We talked about redemption, about second chances. Made me realize I've been holding on to guilt that wasn't serving any purpose anymore." Maggie nodded, understanding flowing between them. "I've been holding on to fear the same way, letting it define my choices, keep me small." "And now?" Ryder's eyes met hers, curious and warm. "Now?" Maggie smiled, surprising herself with how easily it came. "Now I know that hiding from life isn't really living. Holly taught me that. She was so full of regret for the things she hadn't done, the chances she'd let slip by." The afternoon light painted patterns on their table as they talked, sharing the pieces of themselves they'd discovered on their separate journeys. Ryder told her about reconciling with his past, about finding forgiveness not just from Jake, but from himself. Maggie spoke about the walls she'd built after her husband's death, and how Holly's passing had shown her the importance of embracing life while she had it. "I used to think being alone was safer," Maggie confessed, her voice steady despite the vulnerability of the words. "But watching Holly, being with her at the end, I realized that the connections we make are what give life its meaning." Ryder's expression softened. "Took me a long time to learn that too. Spent years thinking I didn't deserve good things because of my past." And now? Now I know better. He smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes and warmed them. We all deserve a chance at happiness, Maggie, even a couple of slow learners like us. Something shifted in Maggie's chest, a final wall crumbling away. She looked at Ryder, really looked at him, and saw not just the rough exterior that had first intimidated her, but the gentle soul beneath. The man who'd stopped to help a stranger on the road, who'd shared his own pain and growth, who sat across from her now, equally transformed by their parallel journeys. For the first time in years, Maggie felt truly ready to let someone in. Not because she was lonely or afraid, but because she finally understood that connecting with others wasn't a weakness. It was the greatest strength of all. The morning sun cast long shadows across the empty road as Ryder's truck rumbled toward the bus station. Maggie sat quietly in the passenger seat, watching the landscape roll by. The familiar knot of anxiety that usually accompanied change was still there, but it felt different now. Lighter, somehow. You know, Ryder began, his voice gentle against the hum of the engine. I've been thinking a lot about what you said yesterday, about taking chances. Maggie turned to look at him, noticing how the sunlight caught the silver in his beard. His hands were steady on the steering wheel, those same hands that had helped fix her car what felt like a lifetime ago. After losing Mike, my old friend from the club, it hit me hard, he continued. Made me realize I've been stuck too, just in a different way than you were. What do you mean? Maggie asked, adjusting her seatbelt. Ryder cleared his throat. I've been hiding behind my work, behind this tough guy image, using my past as an excuse to keep people at arm's length. He glanced at her briefly. But watching you face your fears head on, it showed me something. The truck slowed as they approached a red light. Through the windshield, Maggie could see a mother and daughter crossing the street, their hands clasped together, laughing about something private between them. I'm thinking of expanding the garage, Ryder said. Maybe start a program for troubled kids, teach them about mechanics, give them something to focus on besides getting into trouble. His voice grew stronger as he spoke, more certain. The skills I learned in the club, they don't have to be just about that life. They could help others find their way. Maggie felt warmth spread through her chest. That sounds wonderful, Ryder. And I've got you to thank for it, he said, pulling into the bus station parking lot. Watching you push through your comfort zone, it made me realize we're never too old to start something new. The truck came to a stop, but neither of them moved to get out. The station's clock showed they had 15 minutes before Maggie's bus would arrive. I've been thinking too, Maggie said, folding her hands in her lap. About the bookstore. Maybe it's time to add some evening events. Poetry readings, book clubs, things that bring people together. She smiled. Holly would have loved that. Ryder nodded, understanding in his eyes. She'd be proud of you, Maggie, just like your sister will be when you tell her about your journey. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Ryder reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a business card, slightly worn at the edges, and handed it to her. I know you're heading back to your life, and I've got things to figure out here, he said, his voice gruff but warm. But I'd like to keep in touch, if that's okay with you. Maybe we could help each other stay brave. Maggie took the card, running her thumb over the embossed letters of Ryder's Garage. The simple gesture filled her with a quiet joy, not the desperate attachment she might have felt in the past, but something steadier, more mature. I'd like that, she said softly, tucking the card into her purse. Very much. They finally stepped out of the truck, and Ryder helped her with her bags. Standing there in the morning light, they were two people transformed by an unexpected journey, ready to carry their newfound strength into whatever came next. Thank you, Ryder, Maggie said, her voice clear and steady, for everything. Thank you, Maggie, he replied with a gentle smile. for showing me it's never too late to start again." The familiar sight of her bookstore cafe came into view as Maggie turned the corner onto Main Street. The morning sun cast a golden glow on the old brick building, making it look different somehow. Warmer, more inviting. Or maybe she was the one who had changed. Maggie pulled into her usual parking spot and sat there for a moment, taking in the scene. The open sign still hung crooked in the window, just as she'd left it. Mrs. Peterson's flower shop next door was bursting with fresh spring blooms. Everything was exactly the same, yet nothing felt the same anymore. She climbed out of her car, her joints a bit stiff from the long drive. The key slid into the lock of her store, and the little bell above the door chimed its welcome. The scent of old books and lingering coffee wrapped around her like a familiar blanket. "Welcome back," called out Sarah, her part-time helper, who had kept the store running in her absence. The young woman's bright smile reminded Maggie of Holly's warmth. "It's good to be back," Maggie replied, and for the first time in years, she truly meant it. She walked through the aisles, running her fingers along the spines of books she knew by heart. Each one held stories of adventure, love, and courage, things she had always read about, but had been too afraid to experience herself. Maggie made her way to the small apartment above the store. She unpacked slowly, carefully placing each item back in its spot. But something felt different now. The walls that had once felt like a sanctuary now seemed more like a starting point, a place to begin rather than a place to hide. She found herself drawn to the small garden behind the store. It was modest, just a patch of earth with a few rose bushes and a wooden bench, but it had always been her thinking spot. The morning sun warmed her face as she settled onto the bench. A gentle breeze rustled through the leaves, carrying the sweet scent of spring. Maggie closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She thought about Holly's final days, about Ryder's unexpected kindness, about Cleo's recovery back home. Each person had shown her a different kind of strength, a different way to face life's challenges. The garden had changed while she was gone. New shoots had pushed through the soil, and the rose bushes were heavy with buds ready to bloom. Nature didn't wait for permission to grow, she realized. It simply did what it was meant to do. Maggie opened her eyes and watched a butterfly land on a nearby flower. Its wings caught the sunlight, flashing brilliant blues and purples. She remembered how she used to worry about everything, every small change, every possible problem. Now, sitting in her garden, she felt something new settling in her heart. Peace. The weight of fear she'd carried for so long had lifted. In its place was a quiet certainty that whatever came next, she could handle it. She didn't need to know all the answers anymore. Like the butterfly moving from flower to flower, she could take life one moment at a time. The morning sun continued to climb, casting dappled shadows through the leaves. Maggie felt its warmth on her skin and smiled. This garden, this moment, it was enough. She had finally found her peace, not in the careful walls she'd built around herself, but in the simple courage to live fully, love deeply, and let go of fear. A sense of contentment washed over her as she sat there, surrounded by the quiet beauty of her garden. The world hadn't changed, but she had, and that made all the difference. Maggie stood behind the counter of her bookstore cafe, arranging a display of new arrivals. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting warm patterns on the wooden floors. Everything looked the same, but she felt different, lighter somehow. Mrs. Peterson, one of her regular customers, approached with a worried expression. "My daughter's going through a rough patch," she said, wringing her hands. "I was wondering if you had any books that might help." Before her trip, Maggie might have simply pointed to the self-help section. Now she came around the counter and placed a gentle hand on Mrs. Peterson's arm. "Why don't we sit down and talk about it over some tea?" They settled into the cozy corner with its worn armchairs. Maggie poured tea from her grandmother's old pot, the familiar ritual now carrying new meaning. "Sometimes," she said, "the hardest thing is watching someone we love struggle. But you know what I learned recently? Sometimes we need to let people find their own way." Mrs. Peterson's eyes widened. "You seem different, Maggie. More open?" Maggie smiled. "I suppose I am. Life has a way of teaching us lessons when we least expect it." Throughout the morning, more townspeople filtered in. Tom, the retired teacher, shared his fears about aging alone. Sarah, barely 20, worried about leaving home for college. Instead of hiding behind her books, Maggie listened with an open heart, sharing bits of wisdom from her journey. "You know," she told Sarah, "I spent years afraid to leave my comfort zone, but sometimes the scariest steps lead to the most beautiful destinations." By afternoon, the cafe buzzed with a warm energy. People weren't just coming for books or coffee anymore. They were coming for connection. Maggie moved among them with a new confidence, her smile reaching her eyes in a way it hadn't before. Later, she closed the shop early and drove to the hospital. The halls were quiet, but her heart felt full. She found Cleo sitting up in bed, looking stronger than the last time she'd visited. "Well, look who's glowing," Cleo said, patting the bed beside her. Maggie sat down, taking her sister's hand. "You were right, you know, about everything." "Of course I was right," Cleo chuckled, then grew serious. "Tell me everything. How's Holly?" Tears welled in Maggie's eyes, but they weren't just sad tears. "She's at peace now, and she helped me find mine." "And that mysterious mechanic of yours?" Maggie felt her cheeks warm. "Ryder. He showed me that sometimes the most unexpected people can change your life." Cleo squeezed her hand. "You're different, little sister. You're finally living." "I am, aren't I?" Maggie laughed, wiping away a tear. "Who would have thought it would take all this chaos to get me here?" They both burst out laughing, the sound echoing off the hospital walls. Cleo's laugh turned into a cough, but she waved away Maggie's concern, still grinning. "Life's funny that way," Cleo said, catching her breath. "Sometimes you have to get completely lost to find yourself." Maggie looked at her sister, this fierce woman who had pushed her toward life when she'd wanted to hide from it. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For not letting me say no. For making me brave enough to say yes." They sat together in comfortable silence, holding hands, two sisters who had weathered storms and found sunshine on the other side. Maggie adjusted her reading glasses as she watched her bookstore fill with familiar faces. The monthly book club meeting had grown from its usual 6 members to 15, and the gentle buzz of conversation filled the cozy space. She had rearranged the cafe tables into a circle, with mismatched chairs creating an intimate atmosphere that felt just right. "I brought cookies," announced Martha, one of her regulars, setting down a plate of chocolate chip cookies that filled the air with a sweet, homey scent. "And I made coffee," Maggie replied, smiling as she distributed ceramic mugs. Her hands were steady now, unlike the trembling uncertainty she'd felt before her journey. The warmth of the coffee pot matched the warmth in her heart. Today's book was about a woman who sailed around the world alone. 6 months ago, Maggie would have dismissed such a story as unrealistic, but now she saw herself in those pages, not literally sailing the seas, but navigating the waters of her own transformation. "What struck me most," began Sarah, a retired teacher, "was how the protagonist never let fear stop her completely." Maggie nodded, thinking of her own recent experiences. "Sometimes the biggest waves are in our minds," she said softly. The group turned to her, sensing a deeper meaning in her words. "You've changed, Maggie," observed Tom, a gentleman who'd been coming to her store for years. "There's something different about you since you came back." Maggie felt a flutter in her chest, but it wasn't anxiety this time. It was pride. "Life has a way of teaching us lessons when we least expect them," she replied, thinking of Ryder, Holly, and her sister Cleo. The discussion flowed naturally, touching on themes of courage, self-discovery, and the power of taking chances. Maggie found herself sharing more than usual, letting her guard down in a way that felt right. Her words carried the weight of experience now, not just theory from books. After the meeting, as people lingered over coffee and cookies, Maggie noticed several customers browsing the travel section. She walked over, running her fingers along the spines of books about distant places. "I'm looking for something about Italy," said Jenny, a young woman who worked at the local library. "My grandmother was from Florence, but I've never been." Maggie pulled out a beautifully illustrated guide to Tuscany. As she handed it to Jenny, something clicked inside her. She'd always dreamed of visiting the Italian countryside, walking through ancient olive groves, and sitting in small cafes watching the world go by. It had been a fantasy she'd tucked away, deemed too impractical, too adventurous for someone like her. But she wasn't that person anymore. Later that evening, after the last customer had left, Maggie sat at her computer. Her fingers moved deliberately across the keyboard as she researched flights to Florence. Her savings, carefully stored away for years, could easily cover a 2-week trip. She found herself smiling at the photos of sun-drenched piazzas and rolling hills. Without hesitation, she opened her calendar and marked off dates for the following spring. The simple act felt monumental, a declaration that she was no longer waiting for life to happen to her. She was choosing to live it fully, embracing the unknown with open arms. The morning sun painted long shadows across the old dirt path as Maggie walked slowly, her shoes crunching on the fallen leaves. This was the same trail she and Cleo had wandered countless times as children, chasing butterflies and picking wildflowers. Now, at 65, each step felt like turning the pages of her life's story. She paused near an ancient oak tree, its branches spreading wide above her head. How many times had she and Cleo climbed those sturdy limbs, giggling and dreaming about their futures? The bark was more weathered now, just like she was, but still standing strong. "Things sure have changed," Maggie whispered to herself, touching the rough trunk. Her fingers traced the grooves in the bark as memories washed over her. She thought about Holly, her dear friend who had taught her so much in those final days. The pain of losing her still felt fresh, but it was different now, more like a gentle reminder to live fully than a crushing weight. Holly's last words echoed in her mind. "Promise me you'll stop being afraid to live, Maggie." The path curved around a small pond where ducks paddled lazily across the surface. Maggie sat on a wooden bench, watching their gentle movements. Her thoughts drifted to Ryder, and a small smile tugged at her lips. Who would have thought that a former Hell's Angel would be the one to help her see life differently? His gruff exterior had hidden such a gentle soul, and their weekly phone calls had become something she looked forward to more than she cared to admit. A cool breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the sweet scent of autumn. Maggie pulled her cardigan closer around her shoulders, remembering how terrified she'd been to leave her bookstore. Now she couldn't imagine having stayed in her safe little bubble forever. "You were right, Cleo," she said softly, watching a leaf spiral down to the water's surface. "I needed that push." Her sister was doing better now, recovering slowly but surely. Their relationship had grown stronger through this journey, built on a new foundation of understanding and acceptance. Cleo had stopped pushing so hard, and Maggie had started reaching out more. Standing up, Maggie continued along the path, noting how the wildflowers still bloomed in patches of sunlight. just as they had when she was young. She'd been so caught up in her fears and routines that she'd forgotten how beautiful the world could be when you allowed yourself to really see it. Her bookstore was different now, too. Instead of being just a quiet retreat, it had become a gathering place for the community. She'd started hosting weekly reading circles and writing workshops. People came not just for books anymore, but for connection, for the wisdom she'd gained on her journey. The path led her to a small clearing where she and Cleo used to have picnics. Maggie sat down on a fallen log, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face. She thought about all the changes in her life, some big, some small, but all meaningful. She'd learned that it wasn't about dramatic transformations or grand gestures. Sometimes the most profound changes came from simply opening your heart to possibilities. A cardinal landed on a branch nearby, its bright red feathers a splash of color against the autumn landscape. Maggie watched it, feeling a deep sense of contentment settle over her. She wasn't the same person who had hidden behind her books and fears. She had found something more precious than safety. She had found herself. The cardinal took flight, and Maggie watched it soar away, her heart light and full. The path ahead was no longer frightening. Instead, it felt like an invitation to keep growing, to keep loving, to keep living. The morning light streamed through the bookstore windows, casting warm patterns across the wooden floors. Maggie stood behind the counter, sorting through the day's mail when her fingers brushed against something different. A postcard. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized the bold, slightly messy handwriting. The image on the front showed a sunset over the Grand Canyon, its colors rich and deep. Turning it over, Maggie felt a smile spread across her face as she read, "Dear Maggie, the road's been good to me. Every mile reminds me of our journey together. Hope you're still breaking out of that comfort zone of yours. The canyon's bigger than any fear I've ever known. Kind of like life itself, I guess." Maggie traced her fingers over the words, remembering the gruff exterior that had hidden such a gentle soul. The postcard was simple, just like him, but it carried the weight of everything they'd shared during their brief time together. She glanced around her bookstore, taking in the familiar sight of worn spines and comfortable reading chairs. The space felt different now. Not smaller, but more like a launching pad than a hiding place. The regulars were starting to filter in for their morning coffee and newspapers. Mrs. Peterson waved from her usual corner, her reading glasses perched on her nose. "Good news?" Mrs. Peterson asked, nodding toward the postcard in Maggie's hands. "Just a friend checking in," Maggie replied, but her voice carried a warmth that made Mrs. Peterson smile knowingly. Maggie walked over to the travel section, where she kept her favorite book, an old atlas she'd started marking with red pins, tracking places she wanted to visit. She opened it carefully, the pages falling naturally to where she'd pressed flowers from Holly's garden. Now, she'd add Ryder's postcard to these precious memories. As she slipped the postcard between the pages, Maggie thought about how far she'd come. The woman who had been too afraid to leave her bookstore was now planning trips, making new friends, and embracing the uncertainty of each day. Her sister Cleo had been right. There was so much life to be lived beyond these walls. The morning bustle of the store grew around her, the coffee machine humming, pages turning, quiet conversations blending into a comfortable symphony. Maggie walked back to her spot behind the counter, pausing to straighten a display of new arrivals. Through the large front window, she could see the town coming to life. People hurried past, each caught up in their own story. A young woman she didn't recognize pushed open the door, the bell chiming softly. She looked uncertain, lost, just as Maggie had felt not so long ago. Their eyes met, and Maggie smiled warmly. Moving toward the window, Maggie watched the street scene unfold before her. The familiar view seemed to hold new possibilities now. Each person passing by was a story waiting to be discovered, each day an opportunity for something unexpected and wonderful. She reached into her pocket and touched the small compass Ryder had given her before they parted ways. "So you never lose your way," he'd said with that quiet smile of his. But Maggie knew now that sometimes getting lost was part of finding yourself. Maggie stood at her window, feeling more anchored and yet more free than she'd ever been. The sunlight caught the edges of her silver hair, and her reflection in the glass showed a woman at peace with herself and open to whatever adventure life might bring next. She placed her palm against the cool glass, watching life flow past on the other side. Her journey hadn't ended. It was just beginning. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.
Ethan, go take him inside. I literally treated you, man. What the fuck?